Everybody's sick of Zoom meetings already. We do the best we can. It gives me a reason to put on a shirt every day, so I guess that's all right.
I think people are calling it zoomed out now instead of zoned out.
Yeah, that's appropriate. Hello, Commissioner.
Good. I'm about ready to say good morning. One Zoom after the next, but good afternoon.
Good to see you. Yeah, already a busy day.
Alan, I need to jump off. I apologize. We've got some things we've got to take care of at 3:30. So if we're not done by then, I am going to need to exit and meet with the AG's office at 3:30. So
we understand you got to get those charges against you cleared. So
well, luckily it's not that, but this COVID stuff is just crazy. I can tell you that.
No question about it, and that's fine. And I hope that we can move along fairly quickly and wrap up by then. But we'll see how it goes. We can probably get started whenever Representative Handy and Commissioner Wolstenholme, you're ready to get going.
Representative, I'll let you do the welcome. How's that?
I was just going to have it the other way around, Dave, because last meeting I chimed in first. So go ahead.
Okay, I'll be happy to do that. I always like deferring to the legislature, so they remember that when it comes budget request time. No, welcome everybody. I really appreciate everybody getting together. I know how busy all of you are, especially right now. I've been on the phone this morning with the presidents, and I totally know how busy our institutions are. I look at Lisa and others from our institutions online and appreciate that. And also the community, business community. We really appreciate you guys and your willingness to take out of your busy days to come and do the great work that we're doing here. I really have been thinking a lot about the Point of the Mountain and the opportunities we're going to have there from the education sector. And I think we have an opportunity, just like what we talked about last month when we met, of really kind of be somewhat, I remember what Diego said, as being somewhat crazy. And I actually like that, because I do think we have an opportunity to think outside the box here and do something different than what we've done before at our institutions across the state. So I'm really looking forward to today's discussion and where that goes and where it wraps us up. So welcome. Thanks again for all your effort in helping us through this process. And I think it's going to be something the state really benefits from long term. Representative, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, let me just add too. Just excellent. Not to have to go over that ground, but we had a first meeting here, and that was really exciting. Lots of engagement. We appreciate you being engaged. This is the type of thing where we want to have broad public engagement with lots of viewpoints, and to have everyone feel like that they have had a kind of little bit of skin in the game, if you will. So we're going to turn the time to Alan. He's got an aggressive and very interesting agenda here. We're going to talk about a survey and some RFQ requirements for the working group deliverables and the public rollout. We've got Muriel here to talk about that. So take it away, Alan.
Thank you, Representative and Commissioner, and appreciate it. And thanks to all of you. I think we'll just kind of jump in and try to use this time efficiently. So as a starting point, let me just remind you that this meeting is being recorded. It's also being live streamed on our YouTube channel. So we want to be transparent and allow the public to see what these discussions involve. I don't know if anybody has a sad enough life that they want to spend the time watching this meeting, but if they do, that's available to them. And we do welcome anyone who's joining us. I want to start by just kind of looking back briefly at our meeting in July, a little bit of a reminder about what we did and how it leads into what we're doing here today. So we kind of gave you a background on where we've been as an organization, what our goals are as set by the legislature and our board. We've talked about process a little bit, and we jumped into some discussion of your vision for the site, things you think could happen at this site to advance the goals of education and recruitment and innovation. We heard things like creating a place that is different from any other place in this area or maybe around the country. It's kind of special, a gathering place. We heard that having a research presence and an anchor was a big deal. Looking at anything from solar to autonomous vehicles to smart cities, IoT, etc. Really interesting discussion about creating a place kind of where the rules don't apply. We're, as Representative Handy mentioned, Diogo last time talked about getting a step closer to crazy, where we create a sandbox maybe where we don't have some of the regulatory constraints that might otherwise apply, so that entrepreneurs can be free to explore and dream and try things. That's an interesting concept that has carried through. We wanted to create an interdisciplinary place where ideas from different disciplines could come together, and those collisions could lead to new ideas. We had a good discussion about presence of universities, whether it made sense to have university anchors or other institutional anchors or industry anchors or all the above. And then I thought it was kind of interesting. We talked about lifelong learning. This ought to be a place where, for instance, high school students could come in, after school programs, some STEM education, lifelong learning from elementary through adult and professionals. And then I thought really kind of a good discussion about the state's role at the site. And that's not the primary focus of this group, but your input was really important. And I think we heard that this ought to be a place where the state maintains ownership or control in some form to make sure that the big goals, the big vision that we hope to achieve actually happens. So we took those ideas that you provided, kind of combined some of them, put them into the form of key concepts, created the survey that we'll talk about a little bit later. And that's given us kind of a starting point for today's discussion. But we thought that it would be helpful to give you a little bit of a refresher on where we've been. So maybe I can just hand the baton over to Steve Kellenberg, who is our planner and he's kind of our planning director. And we can take a look ahead instead of back and have him go over the schedule that we propose for the next several months to get our planning team in place and to get our framework master plan done. And then we'll talk a little bit more about your role in that process. So, Steve, maybe we can turn it to you. I think you had a chance to introduce yourself last time, but maybe a brief introduction for some who are new to this call and run through the schedule.
Sure. Steve Kellenberg is here, and it's an honor to work on this project. I think it's really a significant project, especially given the fact that it has sort of public sector and state sponsorship, which will free it up to do things that other projects typically won't be able to do. And so that's one of the reasons I'm really excited to jump in and help Alan in organizing and working with the planning on the planning side of the project. I thought I would just, we've been working on, what is the process? Let me see if you have, do you see the schedule in front of you?
Yep.
Okay, there will not be a test on this, but you can see we've been working and getting ourselves organized, walking through the various steps of this over the next year. I know you can't read any of this, so I'm going to just sort of jump down to a couple of pieces. And the first piece is really, what are we doing over the next 6 months, or between now and the end of the year? I guess it's less than 6 months. And basically what we're going to be doing is looking at putting together a consulting team. And, we'll start with, and this represents sort of a series of steps we'll be going through, selecting a a prime planning consultant. We've already, the yellow bar represents kind of where we are today. We've already been working on sort of the process, as you can see. We're also putting together a list of candidate consulting firms from around the country. We've got about 20 firms that we've identified. Alan, that's grown by 5 since we recently talked. We're sort of reaching out to our networks and talking to major developers around the country as to who are they, but sort of who are the classics firms that are known and have been doing this for a long time, but also kind of who's the new blood and the new talent that's kind of coming up. And so then we're going to shorten that down a little bit just based on our own research, and then come up with a list of 10 to 15 that would then go into this next step, which would be an RFQ process, request for qualifications. And the idea is that we would, put together an RFQ. A part of that will be that what we're calling key vision points that come out of your group and the other working groups will be noted in there. We're not going to put them all in because that would be kind of overwhelming, but we're going to pick sort of a top 5 to 10 and put in so that the consultants can respond to those and give us some thoughts as to how they would form up their point of view and their approach on those. And then from that RFQ process, we'll narrow it down to, I don't know, say 5 or 6 who will get a fee proposal from and go through an interview process. And then we haven't quite decided yet, but we're thinking if we narrow it down to a final 3, we might have a little bit of I don't want to say design competition, but let's say vision, competition. Or we might do it with a total, 5 or 6. We'll be figuring that out. And then by the end of the year, we'll have that. We'll make a recommended selection for the lead firm, and then go through a contract, a documentation process, and that'll get us formed up to when we come back, at the first of the year, to jump into this thing and take about 6 months and develop a master plan framework. And I might have mentioned this last time, but the idea is the framework would give us, rather than being a detailed plan, it would be a framework of infrastructure, of public realm, of key land use sector locations, and strategies related to the key vision points. It wouldn't be super detailed. Like the idea is you wouldn't see every single building and how big it is and exactly how many square feet, because what we've learned in going through these processes before is that things change, and we want to be market responsive. And so the idea is to create a flexible framework. And so anyway, that's the overall goal. We'll be going through a site evaluation and opportunity and constraints process, as well as firming up our land use programming based on RCLCO's work. It will probably take a month to do that. And then we're going to jump into some conceptual alternatives and take a month and a half or so to develop those. Now, all of these stages have 2 things in common. They all have a key vision elements piece where we circle back around to the key vision components that you all and the other working groups are working on now over the next month or so. And then there's also a touch with market fit and financial optimization. So we're going to be tracking each stage to make sure that it's realistic, it is economically viable, and it is in touch with vision. And so anyway, then after we go through some alternatives, we'll go through an evaluation and selection of those, and then we'll actually go through a framework refinement stage, which is the real meat and potatoes of putting some flesh on the bones. We'll have land use components, we'll have an urban design concept, we'll have transportation strategies, which always seems to bubble to the top whenever we talk about this project, open space and public realm components, and then of course backbone infrastructure. And then we'll have a financial and market optimization, and then a final framework plan composite. And that'll take us into say May-ish, and then we're going to take the last month and a half and document this thing. And the idea is to develop not just a pretty dog and pony show, but actually a document that, if you're familiar with the Green Book that was developed for Stapleton in Denver, it's kind of held up in the industry as being a model of how a set of guidelines and policies are developed that kind of have standing over the life of the project and provide continuity of vision and continuity of character as we sort of march through the various phases. And the goal is that we get through that by the end of June. There's one piece that isn't visible in this, but I do want to bring it up, and we're probably going to add it, and that is that as we talk with some of the teams, working groups, it becomes real important how this project sits into and fits into the context. This isn't an island. This is a part of a fabric, of other cities and parts of the valley, and so there would be, as a part of this, some modeling programs that will link transportation, ecological systems, open space, trails, land use into, so that there is a compatibility with its surrounding entities. So that is also embedded in this process. Any thoughts or questions?
Thanks, Steve. We appreciate that review of the timeline. And obviously, we appreciate you being on board, and the expertise you bring to this project is going to be critical throughout this. I guess next on the agenda, Alan, do you want to review the RFQ requirements and the deliverables?
Yes, I will. Thanks. And I'm going to see if I can, well, what I had isn't going to work. So we're going to have to do it on a small screen here. But I hope you can see it. This is going to give you a little background on what you've heard, but a trip through time to where we started, where we are now. And then we'll talk about what we're going to try to accomplish today. So I'm sorry it's small, but All right, so there you go. Everything you need to know in 2.5 minutes. But there are a couple of things in there that I think we want to talk about today. We've identified, Steve went through the timeline. That showed a bit of a timeline. The next step that we have is to send out a request for qualifications to make sure that we can identify, of those roughly 20 firms or so, which ones have the background, the experience, the skill set to do the job that we want them to do, that can focus on our highest priorities. And we plan to send that RFQ out in mid-September. So to get input from this group on kind of the highlights that ought to be included in that RFQ, we need to make that decision today. Let me just emphasize a couple of things. One, in an RFQ, we're not going to put everything that we want to see. This is going to be kind of high level. And so I would expect that collectively from our 5 working groups, we'll have maybe 5 or 6 key concepts that will be included in that RFQ that's sent out. That does not mean that all of the other ideas now go to the wayside. In fact, it's just the opposite. We're going to continue to develop some of the other ideas. We'll keep all of the ideas you generated in the mix as we move ahead to help guide our efforts. So in our first exercise, as we try to narrow the list of key concepts down to maybe 2 or 3, don't get the idea that that means everything else is now lost. So that's I guess task number 1 today, to see if we can narrow our list down, and the survey that you took over the last week will give us a head start on that. The second task that we're going to pursue with you, and it grew out of input that you provided at the last meeting, that we try to have some time for smaller subgroups that can dig in a little bit more to some details. So once we identify our top 2 or 3 key concepts, we're going to ask you to self-select. We'll put up a little spreadsheet that allows you to rank 1, 2, or 3 in terms of your preference for serving on one of those work groups. And then anyone who's interested would ask you to spend some time over the next few weeks getting us ready for our September meeting, which will involve taking broader concepts and helping to define them. So for example, if we talk about an innovation district, what does that mean? What are the components of a successful innovation district that you'd like to see? What should we be focusing on first? What are the key strategic alliances that would need? Is it with certain businesses, with Silicon Slopes, the universities, whatever it might be? And then helping us identify kind of key next steps. So we're not asking for a detailed report, but we would be asking for your help in kind of taking broad concepts and starting to narrow it down to something that's more actionable. So we'd work on that in the September and October meetings, and then put together a report that we can hand over to our planning team when they start at the first of the year. And that document will summarize what we've gone through, all of the ideas you've generated, but maybe some more detail on some of those that we consider a higher priority. We're ambitious, but not ambitious enough to think that we're going to get your attention the last week of November or the last week of December. So we've canceled those meetings, and we may just have you kind of review a draft of a document as if you've got some time in those latter months of the year. So that's kind of where we are. That's what we want to accomplish in the next steps. Any questions about that before we launch in? Okay. And just as we got some great input on process from you last time, we're very much open to process throughout our efforts here. But okay, as a starting point, I think we'll have Muriel pull up the summary of the survey that we took, so we can kind of see where we fell out as a group and see if that represents your consensus, and give everybody an opportunity to kind of weigh in and make a case for other concepts to rise or fall on the list, so we can see if we can get to a point of some agreement. Muriel, are you able to bring up that summary? Yeah.
Yes, are you guys able to see this?
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
perfect. And this was also sent out to you immediately before the meeting as well. Both the live link that we're viewing together, as well as the PDF as an attachment.
All right. Well, you can kind of see as we go through that there are certain ideas that had more support than others. Number one, by far, was to create an innovation district, and we defined that a little bit. Number two, making the site an appealing place for the kinds of employees and companies that we would want to bring to this site. Number three was maintaining state control of the site to ensure that we're able to accomplish our vision and not just sell it off to the highest bidder and get kind of more of the same kind of development. And then we have a cluster of other concepts that were in there, including creating opportunities for an intersection of different disciplines, implementing cutting edge technologies on the site, so creating kind of a smart city and a city of the future. And can you scroll down, Muriel, that accelerate piece? Remind me what that one was. Okay, accelerate innovation, that's right, by creating a sandbox. So essentially waiving some regulations in the area and creating an opportunity for maybe a little more free creativity terrain. So that's kind of where the initial survey ended up. Gives you a sense for where maybe you and your colleagues are. And so we'd open it up now to a discussion to see if those top 2 or 3 concepts are the ones that you would like to see included in the RFQ as priorities for the planning team, or if you'd like to make a case for other items to rise or fall.
Alan, this is Donna.
I don't.
I have a quick question, and that is, are there overlaps between our committee and other committees? What I'd hate to do is use our number one being an innovation district if everybody's going to put that as their number one. Are there overlaps that we might leverage from other groups to make sure that ours is distinct?
You know, she sounds like she's got some good gamemanship going on here. Make sure you get represented. That's a great question, Donna. And, you know, the fact is, Innovation District itself might have been represented in different ways in other committees, but not stated quite the same way that you have. We had a group this morning that kind of ranked highest, mixed use, vibrant urban center. And I want to be clear so that there's no misunderstanding here. We're going to probably have maybe 10 to 15 ideas that come out of all of the groups, and we're not going to be able to include all of those. So we'll be making some executive decisions about what is most relevant to an RFQ. And if we've heard from more than one group that something like an innovation district is high priority, then obviously that's going to get more weight than something that was only ranked by one group. So I don't know if that totally answered your question, but I would say pick your favorites now, and emphasize again that we're not going to toss out any other ideas. They're all going to be in the mix for later stages of our process.
Hey, Alan Diogo here. Develop an innovation. The Innovation Center seems to be, the number one by far. But I think that could be combined with the Accelerate Innovation one, for example, in the sandbox, and the cutting edge technologies. I would be careful with what the Develop an Innovation Center means. I don't think innovation is defined, and like you and I have talked about, by having a building that you call Innovation Center. The Innovation Center in rural America doesn't necessarily generate innovation, if that makes sense. So I would propose that we requalify what the title of this is, to incorporate what was number 4, 5, and 6 of other commentary, such as the cutting edge technology, such as the accelerated innovation by having a sandbox, and even the innovative manufacturing, like even that, which ranks pretty somewhat lower, could be interesting in its own right to be incorporated there. So
yep, you've got perfect flexibility to be able to do that. So really just trying to identify the concepts that you'd most want to be in that RFQ.
Well, and that's what worries me is by saying develop has a very strong meaning for developers. And so when we say Develop Innovation Center, do they interpret, oh, we need to build a building and call it an innovation center at the point of the mountain? I would hate to see that being the case. It's much more than that. It's a cultural thing there. So
Good
in
point.
the area.
Alan, 2 comments, and I'll also preface by saying I really like what Diogo has said. I think using some of the things that fell in that 4, 5, 6 range as qualifiers, as well as clarifiers, would go a long way, based on our conversation last time about incorporating some of the things that felt pretty exciting during the conversation. Following that same concept, the notion that it be appealing, I think, can also sort of fall in there. And I think hopefully, the developers that are going to ultimately be in the mix for this will be able to demonstrate a track record of having developed appealing sites, and give examples of things that stand out as unique. I would perhaps selfishly also lobby that I think we have a real strength in the life sciences and healthcare in Utah. And I think that while it fell down on the overall list, I think that we'd be missing an opportunity as a state if we don't consider that roughly 1/5 of the GDP falls in healthcare. It's one of the 6 clusters identified by the state, and not including it seems like a missed opportunity.
Thank you. Yeah, that's an important piece, and we've heard that from several.
Just to note on what Keith was saying too, I can see why making it an appealing place for industry and employees is kind of universally a high priority. But I also think it should be to some degree a given. And if we're looking for what this committee can bring to a priority that's innovative, I think we should talk a little bit about long-term holding, having the government hold on to it long-term to hold standards and quality and ensure, because I know that was a bit of a surprise idea as we talked about it last time. And if we have a lot of support for that, it may be something that we can push the others, or we can put forward that others wouldn't put forward for us.
But Donna, my friend, I dare say I have yet to see the government hold quality on something. Just look by, the result in most things that the government tries to hold quality on. That's better done by, anyways. Sorry, like I'm probably in the wrong venue to say that.
I don't mean forever, but I do mean through the process rather than just a quick sale, right?
For sure. Yeah.
The master planning, at least.
Yeah, I like that.
And maybe I can make a quick point on that, and that is that, I'm sorry, Aaron, go ahead.
All right, I think I must have a lag today. I didn't mean to interrupt. I was going to say, just to kind of qualify the thinking on that, this RFQ is really going to be to put together a master plan, right? So, there won't be a developer conversation before, or really talking to somebody about a transaction before we put together this master plan. And so I would prioritize for now, I think, the things that will really drive what you want to see on site, what you want to see in the plan. And, we can make sure that we're thinking about those ideas about the transaction, as we go forward. But just make sure we're clear on what this RFQ is actually trying to accomplish, and who it's going to.
Yeah, and that was exactly the point I was going to make, that our board will be working on the organizational structure and the role of the state going forward. And this will be great input on that. And frankly, I think it's consistent with where the board is at this point. But if we're trying to put something into a master planning process, that's going to be more what's on the ground. Programming elements will come a little later as well.
Hey, Alan, Diogo here again. I've kind of condensed all the 4 topics that we had talked about into one by changing it to develop a culture. That way it doesn't speak to a building of innovation by incorporating cutting edge technology and healthcare. I agree with the gentleman's point there. I think it was Keith that said it. It would be a waste not to include healthcare here. A space where one could visit the future through sandboxes and facilitated regulations. The fact that we have state legislature, or at least state legislature's attention, I think makes it easier to pass things that would otherwise be impossible. Whether that's, anyways, anything that pertains to the state. And per our conversation, even work with the FAA, for example, to allow drone usage. So that's what's meant there.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you for combining those.
Alan, if I could add one thing, Diogo, I really like how you've consolidated that to be the definition of the number 1 innovation. But I was going to add that potentially we add, as we're talking about appealing to, or where one can visit the future, I think we need to be thinking about this from a global perspective, where it's appealing to international companies, to global companies, to global staff, to bring people internationally, not just continue to hire from California. But as we, I don't know, to steal the term kind of from Huntsman, right? We can become the crossroads of the world rather than just of the West. I think that would be an important distinguishing factor for this RFQ process.
It's always shocking to folks when I share that we've had over $35 million of Brazilian money invested in Utah through Album. People are always like, what? Brazilians investing in Utah? And yeah, it is because of that international appeal that we have here in tech. So.
And we've had about, I think we're up to 18 million from South Korea in life sciences and medical tech from Mount Pacific Venture Fund. So I think there's a lot of interest globally as they look at the left coast and the right coast, and they find this unique test bed, if you will, here in Utah, and a culture that also speaks all those languages. It's just a really unique opportunity that most other states don't have when they look at FDI or other business development that states do through commerce departments, things like that.
I think it's important too, Alan, as we look at this and Diogo's point that a center can translate to a building. I know we've talked about an innovation district, an innovation and research district. So as you're looking for It would include culture as well, but as we look at an area, it's not a building. It's not a center can be a building, but a district is not a building. Just a thought.
Good point. Yeah, thank you.
Alan, is the nature of the companies that we're putting this RFQ out to, are they the kind who do more land planning? Some of the other committees may be more focused on that. How do you envision these companies that we're putting this RFQ out incorporating these recommendations into their process? In other words, as I think back to some of my experience with land planning folks, when you're trying to plan a big project, they come up with ideas about public transportation, they come up with ideas about zoning, they come up with ideas about how you can place different kinds of structures in there, to the point that we were talking about earlier. Are these companies that we're talking to, do they have capacity to go beyond just land planning to the concepts that we're discussing here?
Yeah,
I
Steve,
can jump in on that one. I mean, the reality is, I mean, these are land planning consultancies. I mean, that's their primary, skill set. Having said that, one of the reasons we've identified the top 15 or 20 in the country is because a number of them will have attributes that link over to, they will have worked on innovation districts. They will have worked on incubator projects. They will have worked on, top projects around the country that are having the same discussion that we're having. I mean, this discussion is not unique that we're having right here. I mean, the project has unique aspects, but there are projects all over the world that are kind of trying to do the same thing that we're doing here. And so, the idea is to find those lead consultants who have an internal cultural and sort of intellectual breadth that are comfortable, helping, contribute to creating a framework for everything we're talking about, and also have experience in doing so. But they aren't going to be the ones to go identify strategic partners, for instance, or actually, to get funding for, that's going to have to come from you all and others, but that's one of the reasons we're spending so much time on this RFQ. I mean, we could have sent a boilerplate RFQ out 3 weeks ago. We're trying to populate it with these key ideas so that they know that they have an opportunity to respond, to say, hey, this is what we can bring to the table in terms of innovation and creating an innovation culture. And some will do well responding to that, and some won't. And that's what we want to see when we get their responses.
Thank you. I thought it was we as a group understand clearly the type of firms that we're working with as we put these concepts out there, that we hope they will incorporate these concepts into whatever land planning measures that they're going to propose. And I think, Steve, to your point, this will separate those who have the more progressive thought processes from those who are more traditional.
And it will be very clear, which ones are thinking in our direction and which ones aren't.
This is Jonathan Bates with the University of Utah. I just want to strengthen or second Calvin's question or concern. We went through an RFP process for our consultant team that's reimagining the strategic vision for the University of Utah's research park. And yes, you can get some architectural and planning firms that are large and international and have expertise in innovation districts, but I would encourage you to be very specific about wanting somebody who has experience in the US system and has experience with programming and more than just the physical environment around Research Park or an innovation district as a component of that consultant and planning team. It's added huge value to our process and conversation. And I would really encourage you to explore that further.
Yeah, and Jonathan, I think that's an important point, and one that has very much been on our mind. You've got a planning firm that lays out the master plan for the physical side, but if you're talking about a district that involves a number of things, and you mentioned them: programming, getting the right mix of tenants in there, creating the opportunities for those ideas to collide, et cetera. That's a different skill set. So I think as we get down the road, yeah, we're going to have to get somebody that can help us work through the softer aspects of what a successful innovation district looks like.
And I would just note that one of the reasons RCLCO is at the table is because it's one of the things that they have expertise at, and they will, I think, combine with the right firm to create the right combination of those inputs.
One thing we've learned from recent discussions with innovation sources in the life science arena has taught us some interesting lessons about innovation. And some of that is there are ways to do innovation remotely as well as physically on the spot. So one of the things that probably will need to be incorporated into this is the ability to have excellent capabilities for working with other groups outside of the state, even outside of the country, that can collaborate with us, with companies that are here, and not limit the innovation to just what is happening in the geographic boundaries of the point of the mountain.
Great thought. So maybe I'll jump in here a little bit. And my sense is that we've already started down the path of the second task that I outlined, which is defining what an innovation district means. And that's sort of the work over the coming month or two to say, what does this look like? What are the elements of it? And what are the key alliances, partnerships, steps that we need to take to get there? So for purposes of this RFQ and identifying one or two ideas, certainly hearing strongly that this innovation concept is on the minds of about everyone. We've had in the chat box some ideas on language and how to describe that, which I thought is really good. Are there other concepts that you'd like to see included in that RFQ beyond the innovation piece? Others that we've talked about or new ones?
We are capturing what you've included in the chat box in our notes.
I would add, I've worked on a project that is so different. I'm not sure why I'm bringing it up, but it's this new city in Saudi Arabia called Neom, which has gotten quite a bit of publicity because of the radical approaches they're taking. And the idea is this is an innovation city. It's being sponsored by Crown Prince Solomon, and they're spending the first phase infrastructure budget is $500 billion. So I mean, it's really quite the project. But I was just thinking of what they're doing, to create an innovation environment. And one thing, and a couple of the things you've already mentioned. One is that they're changing the regulatory environment, which in a place like Saudi Arabia is really saying something, right? And the idea is that they're making it much looser and easier to do things. The second thing they're doing is they're using the city as a stage set or a stage for innovation. In other words, if companies come in and have ideas on innovation or town building or technology or healthcare, they actually will experiment with it and do proof of concept there within that city itself. The third piece is that they are providing, and this is what I haven't heard you mention yet, is capital financing structure. In other words, as different entities come in and have a big idea, the government is actually providing, is becoming a capital partner for two reasons. One is greed, because if it's really successful, they will make money at it. But the other is that it will lubricate the process for them moving through the initial stages of product development. So I just throw those three ideas out because they've been working on this for a while and they've got the best minds in the world working on it. So there might be some things there for consideration.
Other thoughts that we haven't covered?
Yeah, I think one thing, this is Randy, I'd like to mention is making sure we keep focused on a university sort of satellite presence there. I think the reason Research Park works so well is it's next to the University of Utah. And we should be thinking about how to have a university presence at this spot in the valley.
I did have one comment related to that. I noticed the third item on the survey list was kind of this concept of neutrality about educational institutions. And I think that I like the comment that was just made, but I think that neutrality piece probably could be moved down the list. I think that might be incumbent in what we're discussing anyway.
So in the innovation district, though, if we put that number one, we haven't really called out the university or educational piece of that. So as we look at priorities and you're looking at land planning, leaving space for educational institutions or gathering places or opportunities or I don't know what it is, but I kind of think about we've left off in this priority, we've kind of left off the university research part of it. So if university involvement is an important part, that may need to be our number 2 priority, rather than assuming that it's included in the innovation and research. And that educational piece could also go to the gathering. I've had kind of, talking through this, I've had a little bit of a change of heart of what we need to prioritize. So I can see how if you're looking at land planning and other things in a master plan, you're going to want to look at open spaces and what kinds of uses are you talking about? And I think leaving space for education is going to be an important one.
And Donna, UVU has some presence here in Lehigh, is that right?
Yes. Does
any other university have that presence today?
No.
So you see USU and University of Utah programming, but in the Lehigh area, I don't think so.
Lehigh/Draper.
Yeah, there's no physical plants there except for UVU.
So given how much space those consume, I would actually say, anyways, I'm a fan of verticalization of this whole district, but that's another matter of conversation. But I do have concerns about looking to universities as the primary source of innovation. Looking to the physical presence of a university as the source of innovation.
I think to Donna's point, the missing aspect of research. I think the way the language was worded in terms of an educational presence seems to focus more on the teaching side, and I think, again, my interpretation of the wording. But if we're not clear about a university presence and that within the concept of an innovation district, that it's really going to be research that's going to deliver at least some amount of innovation, then I think it opens us up to having classroom environments, and not to say they're not important, I just don't know that they really represent innovation. I also, though, think that while we want to invite innovation from all comers, not just universities, in the state of Utah, the University of Utah, receives more patents every year than any other entity, public or private. So I think we are, as universities, not just the U, a major source of innovation that shouldn't be discounted. But I also think that, as we do with our respective institutions, be inviting private industry more to be collaborating on both the creation and the advancement of those innovations. And the converse is also true. We reach out to industry partners or potential partners to collaborate because we do have expertise, we do have facilities and other things that many innovative companies can't afford. It's just not feasible. And so we're every day doing work to help advance innovation that does not come from the university. And if it's helpful or important to define those really critical details, then I think we should, because if this is going to go into an RFQ, those are things that I probably take for granted at this point because I'm living in that environment every day. But I'll try and articulate here because I think they're so critical. And hopefully if we can sort of figure out the best way to capture that, I'm not sure if I'm fully capturing what Donna was driving at, but I do feel like that university presence should serve in all of those ways.
Part of the issue, Keith, I think, is that we have in life sciences, the university relationship becomes much more critical than perhaps in other disciplines. And so I think that's part of what's happening here as in the perceptions. I agree with Randy. I mean, from a life science perspective, having an affiliation with the university in some fashion or another is pretty important, especially given the source that they can be such a source of innovation. And as we focus on this being less of an incubator and more of an R&D, it's kind of maybe not early stage, but next stage, there will be lots of things coming out of universities that will be looking for space like this as well. So I think those are things that
I also think, though, that somewhat to the point, there's university presence and then there's university affiliation. There are some pieces of equipment, for example, that we have on our campuses that would be not only astronomically expensive to replicate, but in some ways, I won't say impossible, but unnecessary. I mean, we have a small nuclear reactor, right? We have licenses from the federal government for that. How often that will be required for R&D in any industry in this innovation district, I don't know. But it strikes me that the presence there that we can bring, and then the work that we can just bring up I-15 for that unique instance should also not be lost.
Well, and I want to say too, yes, in healthcare it's very important, but in working in robotics, big data, aeronautics, space dynamics, right? You look at Utah State and their self-driving vehicle track, like we don't need to replicate a track. We have one 2 hours north. So you could do a lot of innovations with partnerships with the institutions. And Diogo, to your point, I think we do have to be very creative with how we bring university partnerships together. I was actually thinking of the University of Chicago, Illinois. They took a manufacturing federal grant and created a district with the university and multiple power users and other industries where they had a partnership with industry, and industry was a third leg on that partnership. And they, they didn't have a university building. They had a shared 3-part building with industry, university, and the city. And then they were able to change the way they do city grids and really implement some new technologies because they had kind of the sandbox that was free of regulation from any one of those 3 entities, but was an agreed upon partnership and still is. And so when we were looking at innovation, when I was working in robotics and Internet of Things, I thought that was a great model of not building an institution, but having a presence, as Jeff was saying, or Keith was saying.
And I love that thinking, Donna. What my big concern is, 70 acres of land seems like a lot, but it goes very quickly if you're making, a campus out of it, of any sort or shape.
I agree.
So I just look at it and I think, pragmatically, what I would say is, universities all have enough physical space in their own vicinities. I love the nuclear reactor comment. It's like, that's pretty amazing. Let's make sure to use that. Attract industries that by driving 25 minutes north will have access to such equipment. That is absolutely fabulous. So, yeah. And then the second piece of your comment of deregulation, I think is the key that I've been beating here like crazy. So, yeah, very much agree there.
I was just thinking, you were talking on. Sorry, go ahead.
The question is really, do we make it one of our priorities and call it out, or do we pick something else?
I think we have to make it a priority. But to your point, it fits in with those others. It's kind of the hub and spoke model. We're not trying to build 3 different campuses but it's a small presence that then feeds into those facilities that already exist, so that it gives University of Utah, UVU, whoever, it gives those universities a physical presence to have some representation to identify deal flow, so to speak. So, hey, did you know we have a nuclear reactor? That would be great for you to go get access to and facilitate that collaboration, rather than just being, even though it's maybe only 10 miles away, it still feels like it doesn't exist if you don't have someone there with eyes on, boots on the ground that's being part of the culture, right? You have to be part of a culture. You can't just be a neighbor to the culture. You have to be embedded in it.
So is on a practical level, Brenner, is that a university like office, shared office? Is this a physical environment? Is this a representative of the university that lives in this space? Is this what does this become? And Alan, maybe we don't go there, but that's just what comes to me is, how is that?
I've seen a really bad model, Diogo, like in Songdo in Korea, where there's 7 U.S. universities, and it's a ghost town. It is the city of the future. There's a camera on every block. It's a really cool city, but no one wants to live there. It's like Big Brother. It's an extreme. Whereas in southern France, in Sophie Antipolis, they modeled that after Research Park at University of Utah back in the 60s. And that area has 2 or 3 technology universities. So they do have students there, some classes, but 80% of those classes are PhD level classes. And so what they've done is enabled those PhD students to be available to do research and or collaborate with startups to help expedite some of those, whether it's the IP generation or it's the market validation. So I think it's a light touch. Like you had said, it may be one building where there's 3 universities and they host programming, much like Lausanne does, right? Where Lausanne isn't really teaching anything. Lausanne is just facilitating programming, so the universities can act as that programming core of the hub that draws people together and then can distribute opportunities to the various strengths associated with universities. That makes sense?
That does make sense. And I've reworded the thing that you had proposed there, and I included through university presence and otherwise. I think it is, and with all due respect for universities, it is a little bit of a side comment. It's an appendix. It's not, it's a priority because it exists, but it's not the main objective, right?
Yeah,
it's not to develop a university campus in that 70 acres.
Yeah, it's a supporting pillar, not the overarching design.
Exactly. So I've included that there. I don't know if that looks good to anyone, but that was Brenner's original text with Kelvin's commentary, and now, that added.
Yeah, I like where that's going.
I think, if our main objective is education, research, innovation with the emphasis on innovation, connecting the pieces that we already have without reinventing things. You know, to the reactor comment, I'll give my own little quick story. We had a professor we were working with, and we needed access to an Orbitrap. And so we were talking about outsourcing it. And then we found out through someone else that the university we were working with had an Orbitrap. And the professor at the university didn't even know that. And so I feel like we leave so much innovation on the table because we're being inefficient, and we're going about looking for things that we already have. And there's a lot of innovation going on where people are pursuing the same objectives in different parts of the state, even on the same campuses or within commercial groups and on campuses, and we're not talking to each other. So to create an environment where you can just connect those things, you know, whether that's, you know, having a place where people just show up and eat, or they show up and they do research, or the grad students talk, or the tech transfer office and the commercial people talk, should be the priority. And have this, the principle is, what do we do to promote innovation? How do we do that the fastest? So when we come to the question of what we should do, you go back and say, okay, well, how can we get the innovation faster? And that will lead us to make, you know, better decisions. So I love what you know, Keith and Diogo and Donna are saying. I think it's going in the right direction. So,
you know, one of the things.
So what if? Oh, go ahead, Dave. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. One of the things I think we need to consider as we walk through this, and I totally agree with what you've said, from the education perspective, we need to do a better job of connecting with the industry. And so I would rather have industry that education is out connecting with than to have a physical plant there. The last thing we need, in my mind, the Commissioner of Higher Education, is more buildings. What I think we need to do is to better connect with industry that's already there. So if you want my vote, I say build it out with industry, and we'll figure a way to make sure education is interacting, you know, on the innovative side of where it needs to go and how it needs to get there. So the last thing you're going to hear from me as the commissioner is we need more facilities and more maintenance out there. What we need to do is better figure out how to connect with you all better with what we're currently doing. And that's a top priority now of the commissioner's office and the board. And so if you're going down this road, please, please, please don't build any more buildings for education. What we will do is connect with you to figure out how we can use what we already have. And what I'd rather do is take the money from the state and upgrade the facilities that we already have than to build out more and to get what we need to be able to meet the needs of industry on the locations where we currently exist.
Dave, can I vote for you for president? You know, the whole shebang. That was so good. It was so well said. And I'll even add, like, having a liaison of some sort could make that difference. Frankly, the IP transfer offices at BYU and the U, they try super hard, but you know, in all candidness, they just don't get a whole lot of traction in the private sector in Utah. I wonder if it is excuse me, someone with that mentality that you're saying, that is like a hustler. It's someone making it happen. I love your thoughts there.
Yeah, I'm afraid I disagree with both of you. If you don't have a physical presence of the university there, you will wait years for a professor to show up. And these guys, I mean, the definition of a sandbox is what goes on at universities. Those guys know how to do it. And it's just too far away if you don't have a physical presence there.
Well, I guess I'll weigh in as being responsible for the U's tech transfer office and say that, you know, I would agree very strongly with Commissioner's comments. I think we can facilitate a lot of interactions, and I would say I think we are getting more traction because we are taking a bit of a partnership approach. We've changed a lot of what we're doing from a licensing mentality to being able to figure out how to support companies over the long haul. And where I think we struggle in Utah generally is we're starting more companies because of a lack of presence of large companies that seek to work with the university, whether they're in or out of Utah. We don't have that many that line up very well, not only at the U, but with a lot of the schools in Utah. And so, you know, last discussion we had, we talked about recruiting a company to Utah. And I think, you know, to Randy's comment, we need a sandbox. That sandbox can be in this location, it can be the university, it can be a combination of the two. But the truth of the matter is, right now, from a university perspective, speaking for the U, I would tell you that we're starting companies with innovations that are incredibly promising with a lack of resources, both human and financial, but mostly in terms of companies to turn to that can take these innovations and bring them forward. I think most folks would be surprised at the volume of innovation that's promising that dies not for a lack of trying, but because there's just not enough resourcing regionally, and for better or worse, technology commercialization at universities, for the most part, is a regional sport. It's the few and far between when we do big national or international deals. And so I don't think we need more buildings to facilitate innovation at universities. We've got a ton of innovation that's incredible. What we do need is more connections on multiple levels.
So I agree with Keith on that. So we've worked with a number of tech transfer offices. We've worked with friends over in England, where they've pioneered some stuff with Cambridge and how they do that. And I agree that it's access. It's access to capital and access to people that know how to commercialize the ideas and the theory that come out of universities. Our universities do an awesome job, and the tech transfer offices do amazing with what they have. But I do think a ton is left on the table because it's hard to get in front of the right people. A lot of times those people aren't in our state. And so if we had a venue where they know they could come and see it in a really efficient way, and there was a physical location where the stuff was showcased, where we have, our own folks that are here in the state and the commercial side looking at things more efficiently, and then we can showcase it outside, I think it would be extremely valuable, rather than having to go individual to each of the universities, something like that.
So I have a question for you. Again, I'm catching up and a little bit of an out-of-towner here. I apologize for that. But, where I come from, we have innovation hubs and accelerator centers that have been started by major corporations and by the local universities, and they are physical places. There's two of them, and just not far from where I live. And they do everything you're talking about. They provide space, they provide mentorship, they provide capital, linkages to capital, and they've been very successful. They've created hundreds of new entities that have spun off into the region. Do you currently, do those exist already? Do you have one or two of those in the city or at the university?
So I can tell you, the university just partnered with a private company, a life sciences company that we spun out actually about 6 years ago, to open the first wet lab incubator effectively in Utah. I mean, there was, some version of one that USTAR had at the Granite School District that still has some offices, but the requirements of teaching high school students, I think, pushes it far outside the realm of what a traditional incubator would be considered. And so we'll open the door to resident companies the second week of October, and it will be the first and only wet lab incubator in the state. And it took an immense amount of work plowing through red tape, and actually a lunch with the CEO of the company and the classic back of the cocktail napkin lunch to actually get the idea perking. It was a lot of work. So by way of example, we do have a need. We're starting to be able to get some traction there. We've launched two other accelerators, and we'll launch a third one in a few weeks in medical device, software, and therapeutics, respectively. But they're all virtual. But back to Dave's comment, we had a bunch of folks approach us to make investments, but it was all infrastructure investment that really wasn't going to accelerate innovation. And so all three of the accelerators that we've created have de minimis, if any, physical infrastructure. We're putting as many dollars as we can cobble together with as many smart people who have experience in taking early stage innovation to market. But they're all being operated virtually. And I think the models that we've chosen, you would find in other innovation hubs, large and small. But I think for where we are in Utah right now, the building of physical infrastructure is nice, but there's so much information, as somebody just said, being left on the table right now, that getting human capital and financial capital in major collisions with these innovations right now, to me, is a higher priority.
So that's an interesting point. I mean, these places that I'm describing have a very strong physical presence. They have conference facilities. They have meetings there every day, different outside entities. They have speakers. There's like a half a dozen different sizes of space that you can be a part of. They have mentors that are retired executives from successful companies that are there every day, 2 or 3 of them, to talk to people and give them, mentor them and so forth. And so it's interesting what you're saying is, well, do you really need a physical place to do it? Or is the real opportunity is really more at a virtual level than a physical place? I would just say that I can't help but think from my own observation, there is value to having a physical place,
So
because there is a certain kind of synergy or something that happens, some magic that happens when you can come in and have a conference room or have a space, and these weren't wet lab type spaces. This is more technology, and software, I think, kind of themed. But it also provides an excuse, just a place to pull all of those parts together. And so I don't know. It just seems that when we were talking here about the innovation, having an innovation district in the project, I've been under the impression the entire project is the innovation district. The thing is there a hub, a particular point where a lot of different things come together and get excited?
Steve, Steve, I totally agree with the physical space, but what I'm saying, I'd love to see that build out in the industry buildings. I'd love to see that as a partnership between industry and the state of Utah to figure out what that looks like. So we're not just building another University of Utah or Utah State or a UVU building and expanding their campuses to that site, but a real partnership on some tax incentives or whatever it is that we can give to businesses to help education be a part of that, depending on what sector they're in, right? And so I agree with you that the physical presence is important, but man, I'd sure rather have that as a partnership than a standalone convention.
And I would just finish my diatribe here with pointing out that I think it's important to note that there are 2 of them, and only one of them is university. The other one is private corporate, and it was my company that I worked at. It was the Irvine company, created the other one, and I think they did that on purpose, because the university had a particular sphere of interest and a particular culture. They wanted to have an innovation and accelerator hub that was not university connected. That could be all kinds of other goofy things that the university had no interest in.
Building on that, though, most of the types of programs in terms of mentorship and education, we have all of those programs. We do them sort of across our physical facilities. And I think Jonathan Bates, who's the U's executive director for real estate administration and is also responsible for Research Park, he left the meeting earlier, but he's been going through the master planning process for Research Park, and the type of building you're describing is on the drawing board to be developed 5 to 10 years from now. But we'll move all of our existing programming into the facility and create that sort of more iconic, cool space for sure. I think it just goes back to, we have limited resources, and how are we going to spend them today to move the innovation forward? If we find the right private partners to bring these buildings out of the ground, whether it's in Research Park or at the point we would, again, from the use perspective, we can bring all of these programming components into the physical space, but absent the physical space right now, with limited resources, we've got to put them to work as capitally efficient as possible.
And Keith, it's interesting because people know where the innovation is, and those that are attracted to innovation go to innovation. They don't wait for innovation to go to them. So if you have a center like a plaza, if you will, where food's happening, and you do have randomized connections that happen in those, and collisions that happen in those environments. And if you happen to facilitate a once-a-week visitor professor that was talking about some crazy research they were working on, and you did that once a week, I guarantee like-minded folks would, spontaneously show up and collide and create things that we can't plan for. That's the hard thing about a planning committee is we can only speculate, right? But these things happen naturally. And that's what I would like to see happen is, and look, who's interested in a food court? Well, all businesses that would benefit from a food court are interested in a food court. All of a sudden you have a food court. So anyways, that's just a way to say having one liaison that could coordinate a visiting professor a week, or if that's too much, one a month. All of a sudden, when you have that genius professor at BYU talking about artificial intelligence, and I just bring him up because I backed one of the companies that his pupil, if you will, started. And those guys have grown to over 2 million monthly active users in a period of 6 months. It's insane growth, all with technology they learned in a class, which is crazy, right? And when you make that applicable, those collisions would happen naturally. All those folks that are interested in AI would potentially be there, and you would see natural collisions happening. You wouldn't need to force it.
Yeah, but they happen when everybody's there, Diogo, right? Like when you have somebody structuring that visiting expert or creating an interactive exhibit space for multiple researchers to come. And so I think what we're really talking about is a shared opportunity with flexible use, because we're not entirely sure how we would use it, but I agree that we don't need another university building. I was never kind of about building out a university on that area, but I think we need a space of some sort that can be created as whether it's an accelerator, but as a shared space where those kinds of things can happen, and it can be attached to a food court or, but I think maybe if we're looking at priorities and what we push forward, I would love to see how somebody took some of these national examples and create a space for us that was whether it's inside an industry building as the first floor, whether it's kinds of ideas, but it would be nice to see what a planning group came up with, given the parameters that we want university influence and industry collision to be happening in this space in an interesting way.
Can I jump in here for a second? Just a little bit of a time check. I know Commissioner Wolstenhune has to leave in a couple of minutes to meet with the presidents. Let me suggest something. I think we've heard several of you have kind of worked together and drafted up some great language that incorporates this idea of a district that creates a culture of innovation. I would suggest, and please, you can weigh in if you don't agree, but that we submit that language as the language that would be included in the RFQ. There have been then a number of discussions that really are leading into and moving forward that second piece that we talked about, which is seeing if we could create some subgroups among those of you who may be willing to dedicate a little more time, and over the next month get together when you can, in any form you can, work through kind of two questions. One would be the broader innovation district idea and how we incorporate technology and what some of those elements would be. Second group would focus more on this university research piece, the connection between universities and the private sector, and really kind of wrestle with this and see if you could come back for our next meeting with some bullet point ideas on how we would address each of those. If we do that, then we could go to our next step of this meeting, which is seeing who might be interested in participating in either of those groups. And we could follow up with an email outlining kind of what the task is, who's agreed to be in each of the groups, contact information so you get started. But it would be a way to carry on what I think has been an absolutely great conversation. I'm just thrilled with the ideas and the level of detail. That allows us to kind of get to some agreement points, bring them back to the next meeting, and start focusing down on some specific recommendation in these two areas. Is that workable?
So, Alan, we're really trying to just right now come up with language to allow the RFQ to qualify specific vendors that we might consider. So, a lot of what we're discussing really goes into phase 2.
That's right. So if we take the language that you've collectively drafted and use that as the basis for our RFQ, we can check that box. The more interesting discussion and more important discussion is the one that you've already started. And so I'd just like to be able to continue that in a little bit of a structured way so that we can come back to the next meeting with some specific ideas that we can chew on a little bit more. We okay with that? I saw some thumbs up. All right, let me, so we'll do that. We'll check the box on the RFQ. If you look in the chat room, Muriel has just put a spreadsheet in there. It's a little matrix with each of your names and then those two major categories at the top. If you're interested and willing, would you identify your number one preference among those two and then your number two preference? And by all means, if you're not able to participate or don't want to, we certainly understand. But if you are, put down the numbers. We'll be able to identify the groups in the next few days. Then we can follow up with you on kind of some specific direction and how things can get started.
So I think I understand group number 2. Could you just speak to what the focus on group number 1 would be for clarity, please?
Yeah, I see it's just innovation district. So that's kind of the broader notion of how do we create a place that incorporates cutting edge technology, this community of the future that helps create the culture of innovation. I think that part of that would be the discussion of the sandbox idea. Where do we get, who do we recruit? Where do we get the resources to do it? Whereas number 2 is more of a focus on that partnership between the university and private sector, what's needed in terms of physical facility, programming, how do we connect the two? Where are there gaps that we can fill in, that kind of thing. And frankly, you can define it probably better than I can, but those are my broad.
Thank you. That's helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
I have a question. This is Steve. Have you all, there's two ways of approaching innovation I've observed in some of these other projects. And one is they tackle just innovation at a generally and saying we're going to create a culture and environment where innovation in any kind of sector, it can happen and be supported. The other is because there are certain key strengths within a region and certain building blocks that already exist, they focused on 3 or 4 or 5 areas and put all their energy and efforts into those 3 or 4, 5 industries. Where are you all in that thinking? Is it more of an open-ended, or is there more of a focus on specific industries that you're going to be pursuing?
I'm a fan of endogenous advantages. So we double down on what we got.
Have you made that list, identified what those are?
The state has made some lists, but I don't know that we've really done a good assessment of what we feel is innovative opportunity.
Aaron, and at RCLCO in your work, have you done anything like that? Have you identified a key set of sectors where you all believe have the greatest opportunity for innovation and growth?
We've done some of it. We've also seen the state's analysis, and I think that it's fairly detailed, and they're in the middle of updating it. And so to the extent that we can leverage, what they're working on and pair it up with understanding where the innovation resources are within research and technology, outside of just, what industries are we really strong in, I think that's maybe where this group spent a lot of time for us.
I just say, I think that typically the best performing kind of venture studios or incubators have a very specific focus, and then you get efficiencies from that. It also brings the right people to the table. And Utah has very specific areas of expertise. So it would make a lot of sense to have several different workplaces we focused on.
I was just wondering, Alan, if one of the groups couldn't be like focusing on that topic of what are the top 4 to 6 areas of focus where the greatest synergy could be built.
But Steve, the counter argument to that is the concept that once there is deregulation, we could attract different industries. So that's generating real value. Just as a quick example, the guy at the CFPB, which used to be the sandbox guy at the CFPB, suggested to connect us to the sandbox guy at the FAA. Imagine if we had a zone of deregulated drone usage where you have people flying in drones around. Now, I'm making stuff up, obviously, but it would certainly attract the interest of Uber drone company. So I think it's a mix of both, where you deregulate everything and you double down on your strengths. So I really like where your head is at, though.
That's a pretty strong concept that you just articulated.
We make sure that those industries are big enough, right? If there's 2 drone companies out there, we don't want to spend all of our effort on making sure that it's really easy for them to operate in Utah, right? We either want to find places where we can have a huge depth of market, either because we already have it or because we think that there's some pieces that we could put together that would attract it, which I think is your second point, right?
So then the question becomes, does it get involved with aerospace, which is one of our clusters that we work with, right? Do we focus on drones as part of a bigger play there? But I also wonder, as we focus, and Steve, I agree, I think there's some unsung strengths in Utah that are not being researched as well, because I worked in a lot of cutting edge technologies and IoT and other things before they were getting popular. But if you look at cybersecurity and some of those things, it'll come across as like fintech or other things where it's really, if you get down to the base, it's big data and cybersecurity. So how do we then define where the innovation is happening, outside of those clusters? Because if we just double down on the clusters, we're doubling down on what everybody else is doing in the state, maybe not as successfully as they could be, and maybe to great success. But then are we enhancing that ability? And I think the key to that, Diogo, is the deregulation and the opening of the valve. So if we do that, how do we pivot later if we get a new opportunity that's a burgeoning opportunity in the state or in the region or in the world that we're positioned to take advantage of? If we narrow our focus to a certain amount, can we then pivot to opportunity later? And I see advantages and disadvantages. I'm just throwing it out as a question.
There is also an argument that says you allow people to come with proposals of what they would like to see deregulated, and you have a legislature committed to working on that deregulation. That way people can self-select in. in spite of my extreme example there, Steve.
Good thoughts.
I don't think there's anything wrong with trying to create a broad net as we develop the concept, but I do think we have to look at where our critical mass is and where our strengths are, because a lot of innovation requires that kind of collaboration. Innovation doesn't happen in a silo. A lot of times you've got to have the supporting industry there to facilitate it. So I think it's important that we find a way to know what our strengths are, the high tech, biotech, where we have real strengths, digital health. And then I think we have to figure out a way to do, as we've been talking about here, and create the opportunity for additional innovation and not be just myopic to the ones that are our strengths, but don't exclude them. I mean, those have got to be the base. Those have got to be where you focus. Got to be able to create the innovative atmosphere for new technologies that may come along.
And oftentimes the best innovation happens in the overlap of those larger pillar technologies. So it's having the flexibility, not to be too diminutive, but university tends to not pivot well and government tends to not pivot well, right? But that's why if you bring in the public sector, the private sector to be able to say, wait a minute, there's something really cool in the blend between fintech and medtech. Here's a little spin-off no one's ever explored it. As long as we're creating kind of a culture of exploring some of those things, then I think we achieve that overarching concept that, Diogo, you were saying we need to be thinking about innovation as a whole, but we have a few areas of focus to get things started.
Can I ask a question that sort of takes what you just said, Brenner, a bit of a different way? From the university standpoint, I think you're absolutely right. Bringing in that entrepreneurial mindset is oftentimes critical, but something we haven't spent a whole lot of time talking about, though it was raised early in this conversation, is, where are we placing capital recruitment in the mix in this conversation? I think a number of us have been around, state conversations about whether or not the state would provide capital. I've never walked out of any of those meetings hearing that was ever going to happen. And I see from the arm waving that we all probably agree that it's probably not something we ought to pursue. But where do we put, sort of private capital being at the table? I mean, the axiom, good deals find money, I get, but good deals in Boston find money a lot easier than good deals in other parts of the country, right? So just throwing that out there for us to think about, right?
As I hate to be the first one to jump on this, but that's like literally my bread and butter, right? We ran like a $200 million fund and we're in Utah. We've attracted over $1.5 billion, I believe is what it is, in follow-on capital into the companies we've invested in. That literally, I don't think there's anything we could do to attract that capital that could be done by committee or that could be done at this level. If you create, CRA zones, that comes with its own problems. If you create whatever tax incentives, it comes with their own problems because you're attracting capital for the wrong reason. The only legitimate reason to attract capital, in my opinion, is great deals. And what's fascinating is I do go to, for example, I have a company in Winter Park, Florida, near Orlando, which I'm on the board of, right? Like, other than Mickey Mouse, like, I'm the only other investor there. So it's very interesting that the capital will follow the good deals. And it was that way very much so before. I think with especially with COVID and Zoom and all that we're doing remotely now, that's no longer the case. I think attracting capital will guaranteed come. And that's something I'm very passionate about as a Brazilian that lives in Utah. I'm in San Francisco twice a month. making sure to spread the Utah gospel, not in a weird way.
I don't disagree, but I'm not saying the state should be providing tax incentives to attract capital. That's not what I'm suggesting. I'm talking about this just simply even from where does it fit in the priorities to communicate, right? Because I agree completely, good deals find money, but we're in the same boat, right? Like we have a larger equity portfolio in the university than many venture funds in terms of number of companies we hold equity in, right? But the companies are raising follow-on capital. By leaving Utah, they're raising most of that capital, especially in the life sciences. If you look at the data, it's pretty clear that in the life sciences, the overwhelming majority of investment is ex-Utah, right? So to me, it's a communication exercise as much as anything else.
And why do they leave Utah, Keith?
There are precisely 0 early stage life science venture funds in Utah. I know somebody mentioned Mountain Pacific. They have $2 million to invest.
That's not going to get you through phase 1 right there.
It's not going to get you to phase 1. So so right now, that's why, right? And I mean, we're in the process of forming an early stage life science venture fund right now out of the U, but it's going to be a drop in the bucket. And it's really our motivation for doing it, attract entrepreneurial talent in the life sciences and help raise the flag that investors outside of Utah have adult supervision here in the state.
How many direct flights from San Diego here? Because there's a ton of venture funds in San Diego area, and that should definitely increase. Anyways, it's a different discussion.
I think it's important. I just want to raise it as something I think from a communication standpoint, somewhere along the way, I think we have to have it in the mix.
Now, I do vote in favor of a tax incentive for venture managers, just to be clear.
I have a quick thing on that, and that is when we look at where our strengths are as a state, what I was trying to say is the state would define those strengths differently than venture capital would define those strengths. So it depends on who you're asking, where the money's flowing in, where it's flowing out, where the innovation is flowing in, where it's flowing out. And so it's kind of thank you, Stephen, for bringing that up, because if we're going to focus and not silo, we need to be paying attention to not just what the state defines as opportunity with large industries that are already here, but what venture capital and what capital is flowing into the state and why and in what industries. And then also, are they dying markets or growing markets? Are we investing in old infrastructure because we've been doing it for 40 years and we're ignoring some of the most growing markets that are the next big thing or the current big thing that we're just not paying attention to? So I think it's about focus without silos, and we definitely need to talk to money more than what's already been identified. Industry money and venture capital money both. So established industries and venture, where do they want to invest? Because most firms like Apple and Microsoft and other large global corporations have innovation interests and funds and places they're willing to pour money into, especially in a place that we're talking about building.
Yeah. These are outstanding ideas and great discussion. I hate to cut it off because I'm learning so much, but I think in the interest of preserving your time and not taking too much advantage of it, we ought to wrap up. We will follow up with an email providing those that have not participated today with the opportunity to jump on a group. We'll help get you organized and give you a little direction and let you run over the course of the next month. We did want to just briefly give you a little sense of what we're doing in terms of public outreach and communication. We are going to have a press conference in a few weeks. I think you've received a save the date for that, but maybe I can let Muriel just share a little of that information. and then we'll wrap up and let you get on with your day. From my standpoint, this has been amazingly valuable, and I'm just encouraged that we got the right people involved. You're going to help us do something great. Muriel, are you about ready?
I am ready. So we had some technical difficulties with this video we recently produced earlier this morning at our other working group meeting. So I'm crossing my fingers it works, but please let me know if you can't hear the audio on this. We wanted to show a quick clip of the point video.
Yeah, we're not getting
audio isn't playing.
Not playing. Okay. Then never mind. We will send that to you to see separately. So just as Alan mentioned, we are working on a public rollout. As you guys know so well, as part of our active working group members, this is a generational opportunity and really an unprecedented economic potential that the state really hasn't seen in our history. So we want to make sure that the public knows about us, they know what we're doing, we're acting transparently, and are involving them in the process. Our website is live. Most people don't know about it yet because we haven't told them about it yet, but we wanted to give you a quick preview. So thepointutah.org is our website, and you'll see here our homepage where we talk a little bit more about ourselves. We've got an about section for our history staff, including Steve Kellenberg and Alan Matheson, and the board. We've got our public meetings, just to highlight our working group. We've got all of our materials associated with this group posted publicly on our website. So you'll see our two great co-chairs, Representative Handy and Commissioner Wolstenhume, and all of you. So please take a look at this page and make sure that you're comfortable with how you're represented here. If you'd like a different headshot or a different bio, we've just kind of grabbed what was publicly available about you already, but we're happy to change that up. So just let us know if you'd like us to represent you differently here. You'll see that all of those meeting materials that we discuss as part of our meetings are included on our website. Our agendas, materials, the audio recording of the meeting, and our meeting notes. And as Alan mentioned at the beginning of the working group meeting, this is actually also being live streamed on our YouTube channel for The Point. Please, I would encourage you to go to it and subscribe. If we can get 100 subscribers on there, which I'm not worried about, I think we will eventually get there for sure. But if we can get 100 subscribers, we'll get our own unique URL. News, we will post, of course, things about ourselves on this section and any related news. We have some other resources when it comes to projects, plans, visions in the area. I would encourage you to take a look here, and it's all very much related to what we do. And then, of course, contacting us. Everyone's got a contact page. We try to play around a little bit with The Point and saying that we want the point of view from the public. We have everything from an address, email, a phone number that comes directly to my cell so they get a real person when they call, and all of our social handles, which we've got on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and like I said, YouTube. People can contact us and also sign up for our newsletter. So again, just a quick preview. We will send this out as a follow-up to the meeting with an encouragement that, again, you look at how we're characterizing you on our website. As Alan mentioned, we are going to do a big public launch in a few weeks. You all should have received this save the date. It's for a press conference scheduled for Monday, September 14th at 9 o'clock at the correctional facility here in Draper. We are still trying to identify the exact place on the site. It is a big complex, so more information and details will be forthcoming. If you haven't received the save the date or the calendar appointment, please let us know and we're happy to send it to you. You should be able to forward it on as well to anyone that you would like to, invite to the press conference. We are also providing a virtual participation option in the age of COVID. We feel like that's pretty much a given for large gatherings. The press conference itself will be outside, appropriately social distance, and everyone will be provided face masks, but we'll also be live streaming it on our YouTube channel for those that need to participate remotely. Like I say, as working group members, you guys are some of our top priorities, and we want to make sure that, that you're invited if you're interested and available in attending. You'll hear a lot about us in the news after this point. We'll be making the rounds with all the news outlets and telling them about ourselves, as well as having a survey available to the public as part of our launch. It'll be a quick 5-minute survey, but we're asking the public to weigh in on the priorities that they initially articulated during the Point of the Mountain Development Commission's visioning process. Some of you may be familiar with this process. Technically a separate entity, legislatively created body looking at the broader region for the Point of the Mountain and what regional vision we should use to kind of underpin our work as we move now into the planning phase specifically for the site. So, yeah, we'll be, briefly talking about that, and in the survey, asking folks to, based on the feedback they provided during that process, to weigh in a little bit more detail to give us an input similar to the inputs that you guys are giving us as working group members as we develop out the master plan. That was us in a nutshell. I wish I could have shown that video because I think it really encapsulated what we're doing well. But again, we'll send that as a follow-up. And does anyone have any questions or comments on our communications efforts?
Looks great, thanks.
Great, thanks all. Maybe we'll turn it to Representative Handy as our chair and let him wrap up.
Nothing to add. It was it's been just a really a great 2-hour session. Really great creative ideas. Thanks for all your collaboration. Thanks for spending the time with us. Let's keep in mind the vision of where we're going. We're going to end up with a really something really great, a great product. That sounds like a widget or something, but it's more than a widget. This great thing that's going to serve Utahns for many years to come. So thanks a lot for being with us this afternoon.
Appreciate it. We'll send you some more communication in the next few days, but can't thank you enough.
Thanks, everyone.